The storm had been threatening all afternoon, rumbling softly in the distance like some forgotten warning. By the time evening fell, the sky was blackened and the air carried that damp heaviness before the first break of rain. I was curled on the couch, scrolling through my phone, while my partner sat across the room with his laptop open, completely immersed in whatever task had stolen his attention. We were together in the same space, yet it felt like we occupied entirely different worlds. The silence between us wasn't angry. It wasn't tense. It was simply empty, the kind of silence that happens when comfort quietly shifts into neglect. I thought back to the days when even quiet moments with him carried meaning. When we'd sit on the same couch, legs brushing, laughter filling the air over trivial jokes. Back then, he used to look up from his work and smile, and that smile alone was enough to anchor me. Lately, though, it seemed he'd stopped noticing me altogether. The glow of his screen was more captivating than the person he once swore he couldn't live without. The storm outside pressed its weight against the windows, but I felt a heavier storm brewing somewhere inside my chest, a longing I couldn't name yet refused to ignore. I told myself it was natural, that relationships lose their spark over time. Still, the hollow space between us was undeniable. I had spent weeks convincing myself it wasn't that serious, that maybe I was just being dramatic, expecting too much. But even as I tried to rationalize it, I knew I craved connection, the kind where words don't have to be spoken for you to feel understood. I missed the warmth of being seen, the small touches that once reassured me without effort. The lack of those things wasn't loud, but it was persistent, and it echoed through my days more than I wanted to admit. When the first crack of thunder split the night, I startled slightly, glancing at the window where raindrops began to streak across the glass. He didn't even look up. Just a click of the mouse, his brow furrowed in concentration. My attention wandered toward the thought of someone else, someone who had been present in my orbit more than I realized. He wasn't supposed to be more than a friend. At first, he was just someone I could talk to, someone who asked questions with genuine interest and listened without distraction. It was refreshing in a way that startled me. The comparisons crept in slowly. I didn't set out to measure one man against another, but the contrast was too stark to ignore. Where my partner had grown distant, this friend seemed attuned to details, quick to notice when I was tired or when my laugh didn't quite reach my eyes. I told myself it was harmless, that it was just nice to feel acknowledged. But deep down, I recognized the danger in even thinking about it. These kinds of thoughts weren't random. They were cracks forming in a foundation I wasn't ready to admit was crumbling. I shifted on the couch, glancing once more at my partner. He was still lost in his own world, eyes locked to the screen, fingers tapping. I wondered if he'd even noticed the storm that had now grown into a steady roar outside. The lights flickered once, then again, before finally plunging the room into complete darkness. For the first time that evening, he looked up. The faint outline of his face was caught in the flash of lightning outside. He muttered something about checking the breaker, his voice practical and detached. In the silence that followed, I felt the strangeness of the dark wrapping around me, pressing in from all sides. My phone buzzed in my hand, a simple message, a check-in from that friend. Just a few words, "Storm's wild tonight. You okay?" I stared at the glow of the screen, and for a moment it felt like a lifeline in the suffocating quiet. I typed back quickly, feeling a guilty spark of relief at the connection. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't anything scandalous, just an exchange of concern. But the warmth that rushed through me at his words felt more intimate than anything I'd shared with the man sitting only a few feet away. My partner had already moved into the kitchen, fumbling with a flashlight, his presence barely registering. In that moment, illuminated only by the faint glow of my phone, I realized how much I'd been longing for exactly this. Someone to notice, someone to ask, someone to care enough to check. The storm outside howled against the windows, and the house groaned with the weight of the wind. Inside, I felt a different storm beginning to stir. I didn't know then what path it would drag me down, but I knew with startling clarity that the darkness wasn't the only thing that had settled over our home. Something else had begun, something quiet yet unstoppable, sparked not by the crash of thunder, but by a simple message that had arrived in the silence after the lights went out. The house felt different in the dark, as though the walls themselves had shifted. The storm had cut us off from the outside world, isolating us in a silence broken only by the pounding of rain and the sudden cracks of thunder. Candles were lit, their glow soft but unsteady, making the living room look unfamiliar. Shadows flickered across the walls, and the air seemed thick, almost charged. It wasn't just the weather. Something inside me was humming in tune with the storm, restless and uneasy. I sat cross-legged on the floor, scrolling through my phone while the battery drained. My partner was still preoccupied with fixing things, more concerned with wires and switches than with me. I typed a reply to the message I'd received earlier, a quick comment about how loud the storm was, and within moments another response came back. His words felt warmer than they should have, filling the empty space that had grown so normal in my home. I could almost hear his voice as I read, teasing gently, concerned, reaching out through the dark. It was supposed to be harmless, just back and forth messages to pass the time while the storm raged. But each vibration of my phone set my heart beating faster than it should. I realized I was smiling, and then just as quickly I realized how long it had been since I'd smiled like that. It wasn't fair to feel that way, and yet I couldn't stop. Every reply made the room feel smaller. Every word pulled me closer to something I wasn't supposed to want. The storm grew louder, rattling the windows. A loud crash outside made me jump, and without thinking I typed quickly, telling him how much it startled me. His reply came instantly, "You're safe." I'd be there if I could. It was such a simple phrase, but it hit me harder than it should have. The reassurance, the idea of someone wanting to be present when the world felt unsteady, it touched something deep in me that had been neglected for far too long. I thought of my partner in the next room, searching for tools, muttering under his breath, his mind somewhere else entirely. I couldn't remember the last time he had said something that made me feel safe. The comparison stabbed at me before I could push it away. It wasn't that he was cruel or unkind. He was simply absent. He was there physically, but his focus had long since drifted, and I had been left to drift with it. Another message arrived. "Do you hate storms as much as you did when we talked about it last time?" I paused. He remembered. That small detail from a passing conversation weeks ago, tucked into the back of his mind and brought out at just the right moment. My partner had forgotten birthdays, anniversaries, even little promises made in passing. But here was someone who remembered something so small, and it made me feel seen in a way that I didn't want to admit mattered. The minutes passed in quiet exchanges, and with each one, the tone grew more personal. Not flirtatious exactly, but intimate in a way that blurred boundaries. We asked about each other's days, about what we would be doing if the storm hadn't trapped us inside. He confessed he hated the way silence felt in his own home, how sometimes it pressed too heavy. I confessed that I felt the same. Saying it out loud, even in a message, felt dangerous. But it also felt like relief, like I wasn't alone in the emptiness anymore. The candlelight flickered, and I caught my reflection faintly in the darkened window, my face soft, almost unfamiliar, illuminated by the glow of the screen. I realized I was leaning into every message, waiting for the vibration that meant he'd reached out again. It wasn't just distraction anymore. It was connection, raw and unfiltered, shared at a time when everything else felt uncertain. At one point, the rain seemed to ease, though thunder still rolled in the distance. My phone buzzed again. Sometimes I think about what it would be like to just sit with you, no noise, no distractions, just the storm outside. I froze, staring at the words. My pulse quickened, and I felt a flush creep up my neck. That was more than casual, more than friendly. It was unspoken but unmistakable. There was weight behind those words, a truth we hadn't acknowledged until now. I should have stopped. I should have set the phone down and walked away, reminded myself where I was and who I was supposed to be loyal to. But instead, I typed back, fingers trembling as they hit the keys. "That sounds peaceful." The moment the message sent, I felt a wave of both relief and guilt. I had opened the door just enough, and I knew he'd seen it. Another reply came quickly, a softer tone this time. You deserve that. Someone to sit with you, someone who notices. My throat tightened as I read it. He had put words to the ache I'd been carrying for months, the ache I had buried so deeply I barely admitted it to myself. My partner's footsteps echoed from the kitchen, breaking me out of the moment, but the words lingered like a brand on my skin. The storm outside roared again, louder, shaking the house as though it was warning me. But instead of pulling away, I leaned into the warmth of the conversation, letting it wrap around me in the dark. The line between friendship and something more had blurred beyond recognition, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find it again. The storm wasn't just outside anymore, it was inside me, breaking through walls I thought I had built strong enough to last. The rain was relentless, hammering against the windows with such force it sounded as if the sky itself was cracking open. The candles burned low, wax pooling at their bases, and the silence between the thunderclaps pressed heavily against me. My phone lay face down beside me, the last message still fresh in my mind. His words had etched themselves into me, words that felt too tender, too precise, to be anything but deliberate. I tried to steady my breathing, but each inhale was shallow, each exhale unsteady. The storm outside seemed to echo the chaos inside me, and for the first time, I didn't try to quiet it. I told myself I was only lonely. I told myself it was harmless, that nothing real had happened, that a few words exchanged in the dark didn't matter. But deep down I knew the truth. The boundary had already been crossed long before any action was taken. Emotional lines had blurred until they vanished, and the weight of wanting had become too heavy to ignore. My partner's voice drifted from another room, distant, detached, a background noise that reminded me of just how far apart we'd grown. The emptiness between us wasn't new, but tonight it felt unbearable. When the phone buzzed again, I didn't hesitate to flip it over. His message was short, almost cautious, but filled with implication. I wish I was there.
Right now.
My chest tightened, a rush of adrenaline pushing against the guilt already gnawing at me. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. Then, against everything I had ever promised myself, I typed the words I knew would change everything. Me too. The moment I hit send, it felt like stepping off a cliff. The storm cracked loudly overhead, but it was nothing compared to the roar in my head. I could feel my heart pounding, a rhythm that belonged more to panic than calm, but tangled in it was a thrum of excitement I couldn't deny. Every excuse I'd used to justify the loneliness, every rationalization about neglect and distance, seemed to pile into a single justification. I wanted to feel alive again. I wanted to feel wanted. And in that instant, nothing else mattered. Minutes blurred, messages tumbling into each other, each one lowering the barriers further. Compliments that had been restrained before now flowed freely. He told me I was beautiful, that he'd thought of me more times than he should admit. I should have recoiled, but instead, I drank it in like water after a long drought. My partner's absence wasn't only physical, it was emotional abandonment, and I convinced myself that what I was doing wasn't betrayal, but survival. The storm outside seemed endless, but time within it had disappeared. I felt the shift the moment it happened, when words gave way to confessions, when longing slipped into a place no return could reach. It was reckless, it was dangerous, and yet it felt inevitable. The emptiness I had carried for months was suddenly filled with heat, with urgency, with the intoxicating weight of being wanted without hesitation. The guilt still clawed at me, whispering warnings, but the louder voice was the one reminding me how alive I felt in that moment. I didn't fight it. I leaned into it, surrendered to the inevitability that had been building with every glance, every laugh, every moment of being seen when I had grown used to being invisible. The line that once existed between loyalty and betrayal dissolved completely, erased by the electricity of desire. My body responded before my mind could catch up, and when my thoughts finally did, it was too late. The act had already unfolded, and there was no undoing it. In the aftermath, the storm outside had softened to a steady rain, but inside me, the chaos raged louder than ever. The rush of passion had been followed almost instantly by a hollow ache. Guilt pressed down heavy, choking, relentless. I could still feel the warmth of what had just happened, but it clashed violently with the cold realization of what it meant. My promises, my vows, the years of history with my partner, they all lay shattered in silence. He sent another message, tender, affirming, trying to soothe the guilt he must have known I felt. "You don't have to regret this," he wrote. "Sometimes we deserve more than what we've been given." His words were meant to comfort, but instead, they twisted inside me. Because I did regret it. I regretted it the second it was over, even though a part of me still craved the escape it had offered. I sat in the dim light, listening to the storm die down, realizing the gravity of what I had done. My partner was still unaware, still moving about the house as though nothing had changed. But everything had. The secret now sat like a stone between us, invisible yet impossible to ignore. I tried to steady myself, to breathe through the panic, but the truth gnawed at me. This wasn't a mistake that could be erased. It was a choice, deliberate and irreversible. The storm outside drifted into silence, but within me, it was only beginning. The act itself was brief compared to the weight it carried, yet its consequences stretched far beyond the night. Every flicker of candlelight seemed to mock me, casting shadows that felt like accusations. I had stepped past a line I could never uncross, and as the rain tapered into quiet, I knew the damage wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The morning light slipped through the cracks in the blinds, pale and indifferent, casting its quiet judgment on everything it touched. The storm was gone, leaving behind damp earth and the smell of rain clinging to the air, but the silence inside the house was heavier than anything the thunder had carried. I lay awake long before my partner stirred, eyes fixed on the ceiling, trying to gather the pieces of myself I had scattered the night before. Every sound of his breathing reminded me of the betrayal he didn't know he was sharing a bed with. I got up quietly, moving through the house as though nothing had changed, though everything had. The dishes in the sink looked the same. The scattered shoes by the door hadn't moved, and the faint hum of the refrigerator was steady. But I couldn't look at any of it without feeling the sharp sting of guilt pressing deeper. I had crossed a line that could never be erased, and the ordinary things around me only made it worse. They were reminders of the life I had chosen to gamble, the stability I had traded for a moment of reckless want. When he finally came into the kitchen, he greeted me with casual words, his tone unchanged. There was no suspicion in his voice, no sudden shift in his gaze. He reached for coffee the way he always did, and the routine carried on as though nothing had happened. But for me, every second felt loaded. I couldn't stop noticing the little things I had taken for granted before. The curve of his hand around the mug, the way his hair fell slightly out of place, the ordinary sighs he let out as he scrolled through his phone. All of it felt fragile now, suspended by a thread that only I knew was breaking. I told myself to act normal, to smile when he spoke, to nod when he mentioned plans for the weekend. My responses came out hollow, though I tried to cover it. The guilt had a way of infecting even the simplest gestures. I kept wondering if he could hear the tremor in my voice or see the way my hands shook slightly when I passed him his cup. If he noticed, he didn't say anything. Maybe he was too used to my distance, too accustomed to my silences, to question it now. Or maybe he simply didn't want to see what was right in front of him. The day moved forward, but I carried the weight like a shadow, one that clung no matter how bright the light. Every time I thought back to the night before, I felt a wave of conflict crash over me, shame for what I had done, but also an ache for the way it had made me feel. It was impossible to untangle the two. I hated myself for betraying him, yet a part of me still longed for the attention, the intensity, the sense of being noticed again. It was poison disguised as comfort, and I had swallowed it willingly. Later, when my partner looked at me across the table, his eyes lingered a moment longer than usual. It wasn't suspicion exactly, but something like hesitation, as though he sensed the distance widening but couldn't place the reason. I dropped my gaze quickly, unable to hold his. That was when I realized the real punishment wasn't the risk of being caught. The punishment was the knowledge I would carry within me, a secret pressed against my ribs, threatening to crush me from the inside out. In quieter moments, when he left the room, my phone called to me, its glow too tempting. I wanted to reach out again, to feel that rush of connection, even knowing it would only drag me deeper into the mess I had made. I hated myself for wanting it, but the pull was stronger than my resolve. That was the cruelest part. The betrayal didn't end with a single act. It lingered, waiting to repeat itself, feeding off the cracks I hadn't repaired. As evening crept in, the storm outside seemed like a distant memory, but inside me it raged on. My partner sat beside me, scrolling through the news, unaware of the tempest I carried just inches away. I studied him when he wasn't looking, searching for the man I had fallen for years ago, the one whose laugh used to make my chest ache with joy. He was still there, but buried beneath the layers of routine, neglect, and silence we had allowed to grow unchecked. I wondered if the fault was entirely his, or if I had been retreating too, long before the betrayal took form. The truth settled in heavy. What I had done couldn't be undone, and even if it stayed hidden, it would eat away at everything between us. Every kiss would taste different, every word would feel weighted, every silence would be charged with unspoken guilt. I realized I had created a second storm, one that wouldn't pass overnight but would linger, threatening to destroy us slowly. Lying in bed again that night, listening to his steady breathing, I thought of the message that had started it all. A simple question during a blackout, a thread of connection I had pulled until it unraveled my world. I could delete the messages, erase the evidence, bury the act so deep no one else would ever know. But I couldn't delete the truth from myself. It was etched into me now, permanent, unyielding. The house was still, the storm gone, the world calm once again. Yet I lay awake, trapped between two lives, the one I had vowed to keep, and the one I had stolen in the dark. I didn't know which one would eventually consume me, but I knew the storm hadn't ended with the rain. It had only just begun, and I was the one who had opened the sky.